Welcome to Explore, Explain. This is a long-form video and podcast series sharing conversations with data visualization designers and developers from around the world. Each episode explores the detailed hidden thinking behind a single project or a series of related works to explain the what, the why, and the how of the design process. There are some wonderful guests and some wonderful projects to learn about. So let's jump in to today's episode with your host, Andy Kirk.
So hello and welcome to another episode of Explore, Explain. In this episode, I'm delighted to welcome Denise Lu to the show. Denise, it's lovely to meet you. Thank you so much for giving up your time. You're very busy otherwise than doing podcasts. So for the benefit of listeners and viewers, please could you introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. Thanks for having me. My name is Denise. My day job is a graphics reporter at the Bloomberg News, and I have in the past worked at the New York Times and the Washington Post. So I've been sort of just doing the same thing for the past couple of years at different places. And yeah, that's pretty much it. Sorry, I just sort of trailed off. You can
not at all. The project we're looking at today has actually got nothing to do with your workplace duties, and this is a passion project. And when we talk about passion projects, this is passion project with the word passion in bold letters, in uppercase, loud typography. This is a project simply titled Pavement, 1933 to 2023. Something you worked on in the last couple of months, but just to enlighten again, especially for listeners who can't see this project, what's the premise of this project? What form does it take?
Yeah, so this is a project I did sort of in off hours, and it basically looks at like 30 years of Pavement, which is a band, set lists in terms of like different types of data viz, and then written through with a sort of like personal essay narrative.
So Pavement's a band I am aware of, but maybe aren't as well heard over in the UK and perhaps this side of the pond than it is over there. But just sort of starting off with the kind of origin story here. So this is something that really focused on this reunion tour, 22-23 reunion tour. And you went to 13 shows on that reunion tour, which is 17% of the, I think it was it 77 in total that they did or something like that. But that's a lot of attendance. And actually the first one you went to was as recent as October the 1st, 2022. So you've packed a lot of shows in that time. And we'll come on to some of the kind of almost like addictive variety that is evident in these shows from one show to the next. But how did you get into Pavement? Was it something that was a bit more kind of later in life rather than at the time of when they were at their peak, would you say?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, Pavement was mostly active in the 90s. And I was born in the 90s, so I wasn't really around to listen to them. Yeah. But yeah, they disbanded in 99 and did one reunion in 2010. I wasn't really aware of them then. I really got into them pretty recently, actually, just a couple of years ago, like really got into them. And I thought I would never see them. I never thought I could have a chance to see them again.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was cool that I just, it was serendipity that they went on another reunion tour so I could see them.
Right. And I guess the other kind of serendipitous thing in a sense from this project is that unfortunately you got an injury which prevented you from kind of, I guess, leaving the apartment for a week or so. But this gave you an opportunity to work on this project. Now, what was the spark that said to you, Denise, do something about Pavement, do something visual about Pavement while you're laid up? What was that moment you thought, yes, I'm gonna have a look at this?
Yeah, I wasn't planning on doing this at all.
Right.
Like you said, I really did this because I had nothing else to do while I had an injury that like kept me in my apartment I couldn't really leave, get on my feet. So I had nothing else to do. And what's interesting about these shows that Pavement were playing is that everyone's really obsessed about like the set lists and the order of songs and what songs they're playing and what's coming after what. And I was, seeing this stuff on Twitter, but I wasn't really like, I didn't care. I was in the mindset of, I'm just going to go to the shows and enjoy it. I'm not going to really analyze it. Because sometimes I feel like if you analyze something too much, it kind of takes the joy
Takes you
of
out the moment. Yeah.
exactly, just sitting there and enjoying it. So I didn't really care, but like I kept seeing all the people talking about this stuff online, and I was like, well, I mean, this is like very similar to what I would do for any other data set in my day job. Why not take a look, since I have nothing else to do? And it was really sparked because people kept saying some songs in some of the last few shows were not played since the 90s. And so I was like, what other, I didn't know that. What other songs are like that? And so I was trying to see if I could dig up some other kind of like statistics and tidbits.
Interesting, because I noted that you mentioned that when you were kind of going to perhaps the first few shows, you were kind of expecting them to stick to some of the hits and maybe be a little bit rusty as they've been out of the game for a while. But there's another line that you put in your article about the idea that they're physically incapable of playing the same song the same way twice, which is something I also made a note of, that I recall from seeing Eels a few times, and they also kind of do that thing where you don't know what to expect, and it just adds that extra fizz of anticipation when you go to these events. So there was obviously something there that was a perfect harmony between your day job sensibility as an investigator with data, but also the fact that you're so into this topic, perhaps later than some of the others that you're seeing talking about it. So I guess the question there is, what was the first thing you did? You've kind of had this idea, I'm going to follow up this kind of curiosity about what people are chatting about. What was the next step? What did you do next?
Well, the most, I guess, straightforward, simple step was I just went on Setlist FM, which again, I never really looked at Setlist FM for anything. I mean, I go to a lot of shows, but I just don't care like what the setlist is. But the community that contributes to Setlist FM is like, it's like rabid. People are.
I see. So it's a community-driven data set. I see.
As far as I know. I mean, I think so. I think people, it's like it's like a Wikipedia basically. People are contributing to what the set lists are each night. To the point where like, they'll really specify like, this is a medley or this is a cover of something. Or sometimes I even found it was interesting. I even found like some, Pavement had a lot of songs that were playing on the system to walk out onto the stage to. And even some of those were included in the set list. Now it's like people really, but yeah, this is what I mean. Like, I feel like this community is like, they're so into keeping track of this. And I never really cared. But just tapping into it was kind of fascinating. So yeah, I started with Setlist FM. All the data was pretty much there, more or less. I had to do some cleaning, but I just wanted to see what kind of patterns I could see from that.
So you already had a fairly clear inquiry that it was about set lists, it was about tracks. I mean, I guess there are infinite other curiosities that you could have about a band that's going on another reunion tour and about how that compares with other bands, but you'd set out with not so much a hypothesis, but certainly a fairly structured and directed inquiry, which is, I guess, always helpful to kind of accelerate through the journey of getting the data, analyzing it, and then kind of come up with some solutions. But again, the kind of key words that I got from this, as I said, was sort of unexpected, unpredictability, almost this sense of I don't know, I'm going to translate it to kind of an American context, but kind of a baseball nerd, that kind of fanaticism where you're counting and quantifying things that pure enthusiasts will always kind of appreciate. Now, just again, before we get a bit more into the data process, just a bit more about the context. So, did you sort of set yourself, I don't know, a degree of a timescale challenge to complete this while you were laid up? So you've got a weekend to sort of turn this around. Was that the sort of mindset you were having, that this will just be a quick thing that'll get done and it won't be something that I'll let drag into the next week or two?
Yeah, I mean, I didn't really have any sort of idea what this would be when I
Right.
started looking into it. I didn't even know if it would be anything. I
Yeah.
just wanted to take a look at the data. And sort of going back to what you said earlier a little bit, I feel like I wanted to approach this from kind of a data point of view because, there's like countless numbers of music journalists who are actually writing about what this reunion means and what, like what
Yeah.
it means, like, I don't know, philosophically or something. And
Yeah.
I just wanted to, I decided to focus on setlist because it was very data driven. And so that was what I could bring to the table.
Yeah.
And I didn't want to, like, of course I could have done other things, in terms of like comparing to other bands or talking more about kind of like how they did this reunion or something like that. But I decided I could speak to the data because it's what I'm, more or less good at. So
Absolutely.
I decided to go that route. But yeah, I didn't expect to spend many nights doing this. I mean, I knew that so like once I set out and I was like, this could be something cool. I knew it would take not a short amount of time.
Yeah.
But I was confined to my apartment for like more than a week. I worked on it for a couple weeks. But yeah, and then, I don't know if we're gonna get to this later on in the story, but I ended up using SvelteKit, which I had never used before.
Right.
And so, well, not only is that kind of like a challenge in and of itself, but it was actually interesting because I found out a couple weeks later that in my day job, it was useful for my day job as well because we also just recently are transitioning to SvelteKit. So I was like, I have some experience using this. But
That is
anyway, yeah,
interesting.
I pretty much had done developing like about 2 weeks in, and I was like ready to publish it. But I had never published something through SvelteKit before.
Right.
The publishing process for me, and I don't know if I'm just like not really great at this. I mean, I'm not really good at back-end stuff, but that itself took at least a week or two. So I was just really confused at why some things weren't working and debugging it. But yeah.
So I can almost imagine like a sentiment analysis, that you've got this like urgency and spark of enthusiasm to do the project, and then you're getting through it and you're seeing all sorts of interesting patterns. Then you want to go live, and then there's just this kind of mechanical obstruction kind of preventing you kind of doing that seamlessly. So
yeah.
But I guess the bigger picture is that you've had the benefit of practicing and learning that on something that then prepares you for the day job. And I think that kind of that relationship with the day job, I think, is an interesting thing in terms of, I don't know how you find the energy to also do this outside the work, because you folks are relentlessly busy on numerous projects simultaneously, and so almost sort of bringing work home is something that I can see would not always be the first thing that people choose to do. But I wondered if is it something like a palate cleanser when it's about a project that is just yourself, and there's not a new cycle to fit in with, and there's not a pressure of towing an editorial line or whatever it may be that you have to face in the day. Is it something that you think, actually, yeah, there's a bit of liberation with this?
Yeah, I definitely, it helped that I couldn't do anything else after
of course,
work. But yeah, I totally get what you're saying in terms of like, we do kind of, it's, we have pretty long days, but I feel like I've gotten to the point in my career where I'm pretty good about work-life balance, more or less.
Yeah.
that said, this was very similar to the day job in terms of, I'm writing the same code that I would.
Yeah.
I'm applying the same kind of analysis that I would for any data set. And it's funny because once I set out to do something, I was like, what can I do in terms of something just like super wacky and out of the box that's nothing like what I would do for work.
Yeah.
And then it turned out to be, I think, something that's very similar to what I would do for work in terms of it's like an article,
Yeah.
like it's structured like an article,
Yeah.
and it's laid out in a way that has a narrative. And even the ways that I'm writing the sentences for the data analysis, I feel like it's, as I was writing them, I was thinking, I was laughing at myself because it just sounded, I felt like I was taking to myself too seriously almost,
Right.
like
Okay.
applying the same kind of rhetoric for something I would for, I don't know, something much that has much bigger gravity in terms of what I would do for
Climate
day
change or
job.
COVID or something. Yeah.
Exactly. But then
Yeah.
applying it to this, data set that inherently doesn't have that much.
Well, I mean, I guess that must be a good sign that that mindset lane that you occupy for the workplace is just something that's now so ingrained and automatic that you maybe don't even have to think too deeply about it. You just do it. It's concise. It's well written. And I suppose with that, there's also then a question about, like, it's for you as a project, but it's also public, so it's for others as well. I mean, it feels like this is very much you talking to Pavement fans. And if anybody else wants to come along, you're very welcome to. But there'll be some things that are over your head. There'll be some little Easter eggs that are dropped in that you won't get, but that's cool because I don't want you to get those things. So, were you, whether it was conscious or otherwise, were you speaking to kind of Pavement fans and musos who out there want to see this kind of analysis?
Yeah, I mean, I think a big part of this was also just I wanted to write something like a little personal essay
Yeah.
about my, I don't know, the pavement journey, for lack of a better
Yes. Yeah.
phrase. But yeah, I mean, I wrote it in a way that's like I'm already using this tone and I'm saying these things to my friends on group chats about, when I'm going to the shows. And it's like I one for one, I didn't want to kind of waste time explaining things because I just didn't want to waste space doing that.
Yeah.
And I feel like the way that I wrote this, it came out pretty naturally. Like I was just putting thoughts down on a page. Again, like I was already doing in group chats. So I would be writing the same things that I was already texting my friends. In a way that is like colloquial, and also I'm not explaining, I'm using nicknames for the band members that people know and things like that. And it has this reading this thing involves you kind of knowing what the 5 albums are and like what songs are, and like not the song names are not all complete, and all these things where it's like I just didn't want to explain stuff. I just wanted to get right to the point.
That's a great point. I was going to ask about that later, actually, the fact that, there are some very varied track names that just bring a whole pain with respect to physical placement and spatial allocation on a screen. But as you said, if you can just read the first word and a half, you know what it is about. And because you're speaking to people who know what it is, you don't have to go through to that really kind of extra level of, let me bring you right up to the speed with this subject matter. We'll come on to the design choices in more detail later on, but I'm just wondering what, you set out, as you said, with the data, but I guess the question is, in parallel to that initial data exploration, were any sparks of ideas popping up in your mind about what this thing could look like? What, obviously, the form it takes as a digital sort of article was probably already always the case in terms of intention, but I don't know, in terms of the style, in terms of the ideas, the things maybe you've seen or encountered in the past from others doing analysis of pop culture, were there any other, what kind of mental visualizations were coming to mind at that early stage?
Yeah, I think that well, I definitely built the visualizations first,
Yeah,
without thinking that there would be like a center rail article running through
yeah,
it. Um, that said, I feel like as I was doing this, I was trying to see like, has there been that much done in terms of uh, data viz on like music or pop
yeah,
culture? And I feel like, I don't know, I feel like, I mean, I could be wrong, but I personally don't see a lot of that,
no,
at least not from newsrooms, which is like, the industry that I'm most familiar with. But I I feel like I just, I was just trying to lay things out in a way that showed the patterns that I saw,
yeah,
regardless of what I wanted to look like per se.
yeah,
I mean, I start out with, I feel like, how I do anything, which is just laying it out in a way where I could visually see the differences. But even just, starting out from a spreadsheet of, what songs haven't been played since the 90s, and things like that. I mean, that was kind of the framing that I wanted to take,
yeah,
because that was what the music journalists were already writing about, how some of these are like really, obscure B-sides that people probably don't even
mhm,
know. And that's what was like fascinating about this tour to begin with, is that they didn't just stick to the singles. So I wanted to sort of, with that in mind, see how that played out in the data.
yeah. I mean, certainly the visual style that we see at the end of this, I wrote down words like it feels very analog. It feels very sort of that charming. You sort of, I think, use the word sort of like a diary before, and I think that idea of the old school sort of scrapbooking, cutouts from magazines, and sticking them into a couple of pages. That sort of style comes across. The highlighter motif, again, that sort of sense of a fanatical, highlight the things that have been done and tick them off. So that's certainly what it ends up with, and we'll come on to the design choices in a bit more detail. But jumping back to the data then, so you've mentioned there about the setlist.fm as the
Mhm.
as part of the primary source, and there's other sources that you mentioned lower down the page, Discogs and Bandcamps. Did you feel, just in terms of the kind of confidence that you had in the data that you were kind of collecting, did you feel that it was robust, complete, sort of reliable to work with?
Yeah, I mean, again, Setlist FM is based on contributors. I've never looked at it, so I don't really know how accurate it is, especially because, the data set, at least for Pavement, goes back to the 90s,
Yeah,
pre-internet, 89 when they first started playing. So I don't know where these people got those set lists. I mean, for Pavement, there's a lot of kind of bootlegs that are on YouTube or,
mm,
otherwise, of the older sets. Because again, there's just this community of people who are like really rabid about this kind of stuff. But
yeah,
so I can see, like maybe some of that is where the set lists come from, but I can't imagine that every single show is online somewhere, or
yeah,
maybe someone just did go to those shows back in the day and put that there. But in terms of the data, like, I just had to trust what was on set lists, and I was fine with that. But I did have to do a fair bit of cleanup
right,
for the data. And I think that, something that's kind of funny or maybe unique about Pavement is that they have, so like the same song could have different names.
right, okay.
And they,
That's helpful.
exactly. So they
Yeah,
they have like a lot of, nicknames for songs, or the same song will have changed names from the beginning of their career to the end of their career, or they will do silly things like introduce a song with the wrong name on purpose. So
okay,
it's like, even the data itself, even if it was accurate per se, I
yeah,
had to do some cleanup in terms of, okay, I know this name is the same as that name, like
yeah,
this is the same song. So I had to do
yeah,
some, like, I had a spreadsheet where I had matched up the different nicknames to the
yeah,
different songs, and things like that.
yeah,
So that's also where, kind of like you said, a little bit of the just I don't know, inherent knowledge that I had kicked in, that helped to speed up the cleaning process a little bit.
Yeah. I mean, I'm just looking at the sort of the dimensions of the data that you had to work with, and yeah, I won't go on an endless list of things here, but we've got, you know, LPs and EPs, we've got singles and tracks, that sort of hierarchy of nested content. You've got the A sides, but also then these elusive B sides, and for people of a a younger age than certainly me, a B side was in the old days the other side of the LP or the other side of the cassette. But then you've got a certain neatness that I guess there were 5 major studio albums that gave home to these tracks. But then there's covers, and then there's, as you said, there's probably songs that start off alluding to being one song, and then they maybe transition to another. It sounds very playful, actually. I think I would have liked to have seen them. It sounds like there's always that sense of what's next and that playfulness, for which then a visualization about that is a perfect puzzle solver. And then we've got 77 shows in the reunion tour from the 2022-23 reunion tour. There was a 2010 reunion tour that obviously didn't satisfy their need to keep going. The band tours back in the very late 80s and 90s, and then the number of tracks that were played on the tours. I mean, there's, you know, again, that varies from a wide range of different numbers. So I guess where I'm coming at with all this is that there's quite a lot of different dimensions for you to wrestle with, for you to make sense of, and to bring some coherence to your analysis with. But also then, again, later on we'll come on to in more detail, but you know, how you arrange this, you know, just from the simple fact that you've got different years. You've got this bundle of years in the 90s, then a gap to 210, and then another gap. To put anything like that on a single shared common timeline, you're going to have lots of wasted empty space. So there's already, I'm sure, thoughts in your mind at this stage about, right, I might need to bundle these things into kind of containers, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, talking about the layout, so the first graphic is something where I'm starting to group them by, so the first graphic is it's just a list of all their songs grouped by the album that they came out on.
Yeah.
And I was like, okay, this is simple. I can, you know, there's this, I can just lay this out. But as I was doing it, because again, Pavement is so unique in this way, they have a lot of B-sides, which are not technically the actual B-sides of the records. It's just what I defined as kind of like bonus tracks they released on reissues, or stuff that was released on singles and EPs that were not on a proper studio album. But they have a lot of those, and that makes up actually the bulk of their kind of discography. So I had to figure out where to lay those out, because the other thing about them is that the same songs were, different versions of the same songs were released on different reissues. So it's like I had to sort of sit down and like group. That's why I have in the note that the B-sides are grouped with the album that they're first released on. So like little things like that.
Yeah.
Even laying out the discography was a little hard, and especially trying to fit it all on one screen, and keeping it sort of neat and in a way that people could understand what I was doing took a little bit of thinking. But yeah, and also later on, down page where I show kind of the entire career since 1989. As you said, there's a lot of dead space. So I really had to think about how to fit that in a clean way. And I guess I ended up showing things like the chart is not technically linear. Obviously, it jumps from like 2010 to 2022. So just skipping that, but then, still distinguishing between the eras, as I kind of had in my head of like, this is the 90s, this is the first reunion, this is the second reunion, and showing that through color and things like that. Just I thought was fine. But yeah, it did take some thinking. Like I went into this thinking, oh, this is like going to be pretty simple, but even I think I spent a couple days just in my little spreadsheet, like grouping things by the album that they're supposed to be on and the names and all that stuff. So that was it was not so easy as just taking the data and showing it.
Yeah, absolutely. And you've mentioned a couple of the visuals there, and if we sort of start off with a sort of bigger view of the overarching kind of composition of the piece, we open up with the sort of banner hero image, the Pavement title, and then these animated pennants. Just with respect, so I saw that you did the title with your, I think your left hand, your non-writing hand, just to give it that extra sort of, I don't know, punk imperfection. It's still very good writing, by the way, even if it's the wrong hand. But what I noticed certainly on the laptop version and the mobile version is that this is sort of occupies the full screen. Before we get into anything, that occupies the full screen. And again, was that a conscious choice as I don't know, like a teaser, as a sort of, I don't know, this is what you're about to see. And if you don't want to see it, move along. Otherwise, let's go.
Yeah, so it's really interesting that you mentioned the header, because at first it was the last thing that I thought of.
Okay.
I had put everything together and I was like, I can't start this with just the copy. That feels kind of lame. And I feel like I need to add some sort of, pizzazz or so. I don't know. And so the other thing is that everything on the page is like stuff that is like photos that I took, or the like, even the pennants, those are my my little pennants that they gave out at the shows. So I thought about sort of what, and throughout the page I sort of wanted to take inspiration from the album covers and like just the band's aesthetic in what they've released, without trying to seem kind of like I don't know, without kind of being too precious about it, and without kind of, I didn't want to be I didn't want to seem like I was too much of a copycat either.
Got you.
So at first I just randomly wrote out Pavement in this weird kind of like bubble font, and I was like, this is nothing like, this does not have a Pavement kind of essence to it. And so I just like started to think about how I can make it, I don't know, messier or things like that. And I'm left-handed, so I use my right hand.
Right.
But it's funny you say that, because I did it so many times that at the end it just felt pretty neat anyway. But yeah, I kind of wanted to have the header have a little bit of weight to, as you said, to like tell people this is what you're getting into. And even like the title, I couldn't think of what to title this thing. So I ended up doing something that I thought was maybe kind of a cop-out, which is just alluding to one of their album names.
Which is the 1933 bit. Yeah.
So I just like kind of did that. And I throughout the page I sort of wanted to keep that aesthetic, and I actually lifted a lot of little motifs from each of the albums throughout the page that are kind of hidden throughout.
And then we've got the kind of the title, the kind of initial imagery, and then we've kind of got a set of copy which is, I guess it's sort of introducing your passion for the subject and the motivation for looking into this particular analysis. Then we get to the first visual which you mentioned, which is this set of kind of album covers with the track listing. And actually, it's worth just interjecting another kind of contextual factor, which is mobile versus desktop. obviously, mobile is an essential, almost sort of first platform many people use. There isn't a ton of difference between the versions, but there's a sort of layout orientation choice that you make to make the for at least for this first chart, the layout is the albums down the side and then the tracks listed across, sort of it's like a 60-degree angle for the text orientation, something like that. And then in the mobile version, it's the albums across the top and it's sort of listed down. I mean, we won't speak about the same thing for every chart, but just what made you, was it just a spatial thing? Was it just simply that mobile's narrow, this looks better? Was it that kind of decision, or were you thinking about something a bit more nuanced in the different layouts, I guess?
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned mobile, because as I was going into this, I was like, this is not for work. This is my own thing. No one's going to tell me what to do. I don't have an editor. I didn't really tell anyone I was doing this. I didn't ask for feedback for anybody, but I was like, do I really need to do a mobile version? Because who cares? I know I have to for my day job because I have to.
Yeah, analytics say you have to, yeah.
Exactly. And but now it's like, who cares what I do for my own thing for fun? But as I was making it, I was like, this, it'd be a shame if anyone came to this on their phone and I just told them to go to the desktop version, which a lot of people do, I think, for personal projects. And obviously that's the reason that we do this for work as well, is like most people are coming to your sites on mobile. So I feel like spent a fair amount of time thinking how I can reconfigure a lot of the stuff for mobile, including completely changing the layout for some of the charts.
So is it fair to say then that your primary mindset was desktop first in this case, and then just make it work as best possible for mobile?
Yeah, I mean, I sadly always design desktop first. I know that's probably not great, but even for my day job,
it's the best space. I mean, let's face it, there's more room.
Well, also, I was just like, what can I do for fun? And I just started playing around on desktop. But I feel like for this, I kind of took a lot of, I don't know, I could have just kept things like, especially for the second chart where it's very horizontal in layout. I could have just squished it for mobile, but I just felt like it would have been way too small.
Yeah.
And mobile just has that really nice vertical layout. So I actually swapped the axes on those for mobile. So I don't know. I feel like mobile did take me a little bit of time to kind of perfect. And especially even for the top graphic where it's like all the song names, I had to figure out how to fit that. So yeah, it took a little bit of thinking, but I'm glad I did it, because I feel like, it was also good practice for like what I would do for my day job too.
Of course. Yeah, absolutely. And just speaking again to the first one, which is, in a sense, it's a scrollable revealing of which of these tracks were played at different points in the tours and in both reunion tours. You don't see many projects that kind of leave, in a sense, text values as they are. And I think it's an underused method. I mean, when I was thinking about what you could have done alternatively for this, the only options I could think about were sort of Venn diagram type Euler diagrams. But did you play around with any other forms for showing this, or did you just kind of land on this, again, that idea of like the highlighter pen sort of striking things off and marking things out method?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, this top one was kind of a sort of like an introduction, and I wanted to kind of lay it out in terms of just you see everything in release order, just kind of laying out the universe of like the songs grouped by the albums. And also it's just easiest, like it was the easiest code to write, just laying it out that way, because my data was already sort of like that. But yeah, I think, going back to audience, people are familiar with the albums and what songs are on them. So
track list, of course,
part of this was also just, like if there's more highlighting at the top, that's the earlier albums, and sort of seeing the visual trends that way. So I guess for me, I saw it more in terms of like a chronology and a discography.
And actually thinking about it, there is something perhaps about this first visual that is perhaps more aligned with the reading that you've just done, and it's not a jump straight into some, relatively abstracted chart. It's a sort of gentle, a gentle flow from text to a bit more text, but now organized and highlighted. So yeah, it works very well, and I do again. I like the kind of execution of the look and feel. This sort of imperfect highlight and these sort of lines that carve out the distinction between A sides and B sides. It feels very pen and ink, which again feels very aligned with even just the imagery of the album covers. It's that kind of illustrative, imperfect kind of approach. And then we've got some more copy, and again along the way. So we've got these nice GIFs performed out with your photographs, as I said, with these sort of cutouts and sort of saturated filters, which are just a very nice touch. And again, just on that, these don't happen by accident. Were you just thinking about some nice, just decorative assets for the margins?
Yeah, I'm actually really happy you noticed that highlighter thing because that took me a while to figure out. And I feel like it's so small, but like you said, going back to this being a passion project, once I did all the technical stuff and made sure it worked technically, I was thinking, how can I sort of make this more fun than just, I don't know, 400 words and a couple charts? Because like when I had finished the technical stuff at that stage, it felt very much like, I don't know, I didn't know if it was the right kind of vibe for this piece, where at the end of the day, we're talking about Pavement. It's like kind of a silly analysis that I'm doing. And Pavement itself, the band, they kind of just don't take themselves seriously. So I'm like, I feel like it's kind of strange that I'm doing this to begin with. So I wanted to kind of inject some kind of fun, delightful little things, including, the highlighter. And that's also sort of taken from, like you said, a lot of their album aesthetics of, they do a lot of, handwriting on the albums and like scraps of stuff, like kind of like zine-like things. And that's also where I got the idea to, I had all these photos from the shows and I was like, what can I possibly do with them? But it was kind of boring to just like lay them out as a regular photo, So I just decided to have some fun with it and did these kind of junky cutouts. And
that's it.
Yeah,
they're very nice. They're very nice, like, I don't know, a companion piece to sort of, again, sort of just get across the vibe, of what it's like to be at the show, obviously, because that's the thing that you've been to, all these times. And as I said, we moved down the page and we've got this extra bit of copy in the second section, which sort of reflects on the shows and the kind of unpredictability that you drew from them. And then we've got a couple of sections of analysis that you've already mentioned in terms of, we've got all the is it 77? Can't remember how many it is.
Like that.
Reunion shows across, certainly in the desktop version, across the top. And then down the side, it's simply just little sort of unit charts, dots for each track that was played. But those tracks behind the hover event, the mouse over, reveal which is which. But then you've got the main set, you've got the encore, and I think on a couple of occasions you've got a double encore, which I don't even know if it has does it have a separate name for a double encore? But it's about, as you said before, about how they've structured their sets, the sequencing, and when you pick a certain track, whether it's within the chart or through the drop down, you can see just how chaotically unpredictable the sequencing is, which again is I think just as a broader point about data viz, sometimes we see such chaos and think that it's not a satisfactory pattern because it isn't given a nice trend or something consistent. Well, chaos is a message. Chaos is a pattern, even if it doesn't feel neat and ideal to slot things into a nice box of analysis. It's a finding. So looking across this, it does invite that interrogation. It does invite that interactivity. And I think just while we're here and on the note of interactivity and the dynamism, it's a fairly light touch project in terms of the amount of work that's asked of us as the users, other than, you know, the occasional mouse over for tooltips or, as I said, the drop down menu for this. Again, was that a deliberate choice to minimize the workload on the user? And I suppose by extension, were there things that you were kind of thinking of including but didn't in the end?
Yeah, I feel like that's sort of very similar to, again, what I would do for my day job. I feel like I keep saying this, but
No, absolutely.
it is just, you know, like taking experience from the work that I do anyways. But yeah, I feel like I'm sort of strained to less interaction and just laying things out, and without having people to work too hard, without having readers work too hard for getting information. That said, the only really kind of interactive piece of this, as you said, is the drop down, which I wasn't planning on putting in at first because it was kind of a, you know, it took a bit of work. I just didn't want to do it. But as I was, you know, laying out this little matrix of songs by night, I wanted to see myself what some of these words are. I already had the hover interaction.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, that's pretty cool. You know, you can hover over and see what the songs are, but what if I want to know about a specific song? Like I wanted to know. So
you were trying
know,
to use it, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I was like, you know, maybe people would have fun, you know, exploring this and like actually pausing here to spend time on, like, I could imagine if you're really obsessive about this kind of stuff, as people were online, you probably want to know stuff about specific songs that you, I don't know, really like or something. So, and even putting that drop down in, I ended up having to fix a little bug, like an interaction bug that I had with it that took also a couple days, but I feel like it was worth it. But yeah, just like putting that in, it took a little bit of work, but I think it was worth it. I feel like I could imagine spending time on it. I mean,
well, that's it. I think it is a point in the article where you almost you've served up that curiosity so much, and you've kind of whetted the appetite for that curiosity, and now here's a tool to maybe just satisfy whatever you want to know. Here's a thing that will do that. But I think what's important is that you back it up then with some kind of hand-picked insights that you've pulled out, whether it's about which songs were the most frequent openers, the closers. Moving down, we've got the encores, the rarities, which I think is another nice little twist about the ones that were just, you know, the lesser spotted kind of collector's items. And so I think that for those who don't want to hang around and do an interactive intervention, they've got, you know, some insights that they might have ended up finding themselves, but otherwise did not. So yeah, I mean, they kind of speak for themselves, but I do like how you bundle those into those different kind of headings. And then we've got a bit more copy, and then we go into another set of charts. Actually, technically the last set of charts, but there's quite a few, which looks at almost like fusing together the previous two inquiries about the albums and the tracks, the discography, and then when they were played, and now we've got a kind of a merger. So, I mean, there's different ways you could describe this sort of chart type, whether it's a sort of matrix chart or it's got a little vibe of an upset plot with it. But you've got the albums in their chronology, the lists of the tracks, and then when they've appeared and their frequency of appearance on these different tours. Now, a little question I had. So for these little markers, we've got these circles with what looks like either a little brain or cloud symbol. I suspect that's another little bit of fan service. What do those represent?
Yeah, so that's so like I said, throughout the page at the end, I was trying to think of how I can inject some like little fun Easter eggs. So that's like a little motif taken from one of the album covers. And even like the animated photos, like
I
the
can see it now.
borders,
Yes, yeah.
like that's taken from one of the album covers. And so are the little stars on the other chart. So just
Yeah.
stuff like that, and kind of eye-dropping colors from the album covers
Yeah.
throughout. Yeah.
And as you said, there's a difficult kind of layout challenge here with the 90s roughly, and then the sort of 2010 and 22, 23 tours. But what you have done is kind of maintained from a color perspective the kind of associations with the 2022, 23 tour being the kind of yellow, amber shade. We've got the blue for the 2010, and then the kind of green for the original the original tours. I mean, those things we kind of take for granted the thought that goes into those things. But again, you know, this will be something that you are well versed in, again, in the day job. But I don't know. I don't know if there's a question here, but more, can you just sort of speak to the, you know, the experience that you've now got as the creator of these things, just these little details that just take away a little brain work. You know, what are these colors now? Are there something different? You remove that need.
Yeah, the colors were actually they were a little hard for me to figure out. So it's funny you say that, because I had to come up with a set of colors for the data needs,
Yeah,
right? So like I wanted to have the colors be associated with the decades,
yeah,
but then use the same colors at the top where I'm
yeah,
showing ones that are played across multiple decades and things like that. And then having that work with kind of the rest of the page's layout and the vibe of the piece. And I landed on these kind of highlightery colors to kind of make it look like highlighter, basically.
yeah,
But what's funny is, like, you know, I actually changed the colors on the song matrix, the second graphic, multiple times, because I was just trying to come up with ones that showed enough contrast and things like that. But I ended up again serendipitously choosing colors that matched the stars from the album
yeah.
cover. So that was kind of a fun little coincidence. But yeah, I decided to use colors to kind of really show in the bottom chart kind of the different decades. And I think highlighting kind of the app, like highlighting the length of time between the last time
Yeah.
that a song was played was kind of an interesting pattern to see throughout the timeline.
Well, that's it. And I mean, I'll come back to colors in a second, but I think what I love about the patterns that emerge from this final set of charts is the impact of a new album being released. And how obviously that'll be the songs that are played most frequently. But then it's also how, as a band, do you manage playing for the fans who have been around for a while the original hits, you know, the hits from the earlier albums, and you can see the patterns, you know, just sort of jump off the page as you can go through time and as new albums are released, and how there's just, you know, a bit more of a drop off of some of the older ones, but then the reunion tours are almost this, right, we've got a chance to kind of go back over what we want to play and what we want to do, and it's you know, again, it's obviously what you set out to achieve, which is to reveal these patterns through the data. But again, the color thing I think is kind of interesting because you're not confined to a corporate palette. You're not confined to many restrictions other than your own kind of creative choices. And it does feel that you've perhaps, I don't know, correct me if I'm wrong, self-imposed a certain limitation in the variety of colors that you wanted to use, or limited the number of colors that you could kind of almost get away with using, in a sense. You know, you got the kind of green, the blue, the yellow, and then there's, you know, there's some sort of spot colors of the sort of darker red for some of the B-side markings, but otherwise it's quite limited. And the colors come from the photographs and the album covers. But I could imagine being tempted to try and shoehorn all the kind of different colors from the albums and just try and make them, and they wouldn't have worked. But this is something that's quite subtle. And what I also like as well is that you've used a non-white background to allow white to then be used in the either the foreground or the apparatus. Again, is that, I don't know, is that a style that you like, having a non-white background to then bring that into the reckoning?
Yeah, I obviously every page starts out as a white background. And I didn't end up changing the background color until sort of closer to the end when I was trying to figure out the different colors. Originally, as I was trying to kind of take stuff from the album covers, I tried to use this texture that was on one of the album covers as the
Okay.
background, and I just couldn't get it to look right without, I just couldn't get it to look kind of seamless. And also it was just taking up a lot of space in terms of actual, like the image was large to serve up.
Yeah.
So I was just, didn't want to deal with it. But I ended up taking kind of a color similar to that texture. I just felt like the white felt very sterile. And, you know, if I'm trying to make this kind of like a scribbly kind of thing that's like written on or whatever, I didn't want it to feel like a web page per se.
Yeah, got you.
You know, and just kind of trying to take away from what I feel like would be just a boring run through of charts and just adding that kind of something else to make it.
Yeah.
And I feel like you don't realize it until you're hovering over that last
That's right.
chart.
That's right.
Like
It feels like paper. You know, it feels like the paper's not white in books. It's kind of not white, but it's close enough to then still give you that variety to work white and different greys. The other thing I'm just thinking about for the last charts as well, and it may not be deliberate, it probably isn't deliberate, but it does feel like musical notation. It feels like musical, a manuscript. I mean, was that, to kind of quote Bob Ross, was that a nice happy accident in the end, or were you sort of edging towards something that might be a bit musical in vibe?
No, not at all.
Right.
I'm glad you think that. I think the thing with a lot of the chart types is I was also really trying to think of how I can make this not like a regular chart type that I would
A
do
monthly report. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I didn't want it to look boring, basically.
Yeah.
I actually think it kind of ended up being pretty boring in terms of it's not a really experimental chart type or whatever. It's something what I would, that I would
Yeah.
do that you could see on like a news article.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's what a lot of these ended up being is like I was like, when I was technically done with them, they just looked kind of boring. Which is why, even though they do still have the skeletons of kind of a regular chart you see, I try to do something fun with them, but at the end of the day, they are just, it's a little bubble scatter plot.
Absolutely. And the last question I've got about those charts, which I think is a nice feature, is, some of these bubbles are quite big and they sort of slightly obfuscate each other. But in doing that, they do convey bigness. They do convey that these were played a lot. I'm just wondering, from your sort of design iterations, did you sort of tweak the parameters of how much sort of radius or area space these circles did? I could imagine that the first version would be, oh no, let's make it all so it all fits into its nice, neat row and column width and height. But obviously you settle on something that did, extrude beyond the borders of each row and column, but it's better for it, I think.
Yeah, part of the challenge was also figuring out how big to make them to fit the little cloud inside.
Right.
So, because I wanted to make them big enough that people could realize what it is.
Yeah.
At first they were pretty small and you couldn't really see what the white thing was inside of them. But yeah, I feel like this is something that I deal with also just with any other data set. It's like you want to find the right size to show variety, but also the actual patterns in the data. And when they were too small, you couldn't really see the differences between some of the lesser played and more played songs.
Right.
So, and yeah, like I didn't really care that they overlapped as long as you could just see the general trend.
That's it. And that's where, data viz is ultimately a recipe of rules and principles, but then also these fingertip judgments, these instincts that don't have a rule book, that convey what you want to convey as a communicator. Just to kind of look to close things off then. So you talked before about SvelteKit as a sort of parallel journey. I mean, just to kind of summarize, what was the sort of tool stack that you used overall? You mentioned Excel as well. So what for people out there looking to think, how did you make this? What was the technology stack you used?
Yeah, it's how I would approach any other project. I used Python to parse and analyze the data, the raw data. And then I oftentimes, as I do always, put stuff into a spreadsheet. I just use Google spreadsheets.
Yeah.
And just to kind of lay out my data. And also, like I said, I had to do some like like I had to do a little dictionary of same song, different title type of thing. And then the build is with SvelteKit, and that's pretty much it on the front end. And
how about the
yeah.
GIFs? Because some people ask,
yeah, sure,
we
yeah,
often assume
Photoshop
that,
and
but people,
Illustrator.
Okay, right.
Yeah, I'm not that great at Photoshop, but I could at least do those junky cutouts. And well, yeah, I guess I actually made the actual animations with Image Magic, which is like a node library, but you know, it's just it's an image processing kind of library that I have used before for other stories.
And the last question, just in terms of kind of closing the story off, is when did you know that you'd finished? When did you know that there's nothing else to change and you could just, I know that you've talked about there's a bit of work to kind of get it over the line in terms of finishing and publishing, but when did you stop tweaking, messing around with things, nudging things? When did you sort of say, right, hands off, finished?
Yeah, so I built the 3 visualizations first. And then, you know, as I was building the first and the second ones, when I was done with the first 2, I was like, well, this is pretty good, but it kind of feels like not a lot of stuff. I don't know. I didn't really know how long I wanted to make it. You know, it could have just been done with one chart, but I made the second one because I had more questions myself that I wanted to answer. So as you said, the third final chart is kind of like a culmination of just tying everything together. And I thought it was nice to just end with that. And the thing about it is like this data, the data viz all use kind of the same data. I'm not really introducing anything new, but just showing different cuts of it.
Yeah.
And when I was done with that, I was like, okay, this is kind of meaty enough. Now I can like write through it. Even the writing, I was like editing myself a lot, going back and forth.
Imagine, yeah.
Trying not to sound too crazy. And you know, kind of keeping a more colloquial tone that I don't get to do usually for work. Writing in first person and all that. And yeah, I don't know. I felt like I kept wanting to add little things to make it, you know, the highlighter stuff, borders and things like that. I just wanted to keep making it more kind of fun and interesting, but at some point I was just done with it. You know, my injury had healed. I had other things to do with my life. I didn't want to deal with this any longer.
Right. No, that's a fair thing. I'm always fascinated by when people reach that decision, because it is tempting to keep tweaking, to keep doing things, and then you get to a point perhaps where you do more harm, because you then start to look at things without that distance that you sometimes need. But yeah, I mean, the last question I've just got in our kind of reflections now, with it in the, albeit recent, but still in the rear mirror. Was it enjoyable? You know, what are your feelings after doing it, and also, you know, what was some of the nice sort of feedback you got? I did see you got a lot of really nice feedback from the Pavement community, not least, and let me correctly pronounce his name, Bob Nastanovich, a member of the band himself, who wrote, "Kind thanks for coming to all these shows. I greatly appreciate both your diligence and enthusiasm in making these. Much obliged." So that's a nice thing to pull off. Yeah. So what are your kind of closing reflections in general?
Yeah, I mean, I had never really done uh something of this kind of um I don't know, something this big for
Yeah.
fun. I did publish like a small thing a couple years ago just for fun, but that took a day and then I was done with it. And it was just kind of a throwaway thing. But I guess I've always wanted to do something for fun, but I just didn't know. I always have like, oh, this would be cool to do, but I don't have the time for that, or I just didn't care enough to actually
Yeah.
go down the path. And I felt like with this, I didn't. I just had all these, like, I didn't have to do that much work in terms of like background research or like, like normally for a news story or something, I have to take a couple days to like get myself situated with the data and do some reading of what the things mean. But for
Yeah,
this, it was
sure.
just like I knew so much
Yeah.
already. And it was just pretty easy to get it down on the page. So I thought it was really fun. It was very enjoyable. At some points, it didn't really feel like work, and I found myself really wanting to like put effort into making it nice and
Yeah.
adding all the little details. Even if it took me, a day or two, I felt like I wanted to put the effort into it, and I'm glad I
Yeah.
did. Um, that said, all of this came down to that injury. Like if I wasn't injured and I had things to do after work, I don't know if I would have ever done this, but
Well, I guess the next
I'm
question
glad I
then,
did.
Denise, is not wanting you to be injured again. Is there another project in you? Have you got something that I don't know if it's unfinished business with this topic, or has it stirred some sense of, yeah, I might do some more of these curiosities about pop culture or things that you're into?
I have like on my phone a little notes of like, oh, just
One
like
day.
one sentence questions that I
Yeah.
have, like, what about this? What about that? That I would never really try to pitch at work because they're not really work related questions.
Yeah.
They're like things I'm asking my friends in my group chats, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So um but definitely nothing else in terms of, well, I don't know if I don't want to do another pavement thing. I feel like that make me feel that make me look seem really crazy. But
Unless they
um
do tour again in 2030 as you leave as
I'm
a
not
teaser at the
updating
end.
this.
Right.
No.
Okay. Okay.
But what's really funny is like you talk about reaching this kind of audience is like I feel like this page that I made is very similar to what you would see on like a news site or from any other database team or
The
something.
pudding
But
sort of thing. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
and even like there's way more cooler things that have been put out by publications and things like that. But it was funny because I felt like I reached this audience like music Twitter or like pavement fans who are not really seeing this kind of stuff on a day to day.
Mm.
And I felt like some some part of me was like, have people never seen a chart before?
Right.
Because they're like so fascinated by what to me is like a very straightforward thing
Yeah.
that it's like I do this stuff all the time.
Yeah.
But it was just kind of interesting to hit that different kind of audience. And
Yeah.
like I feel like this kind of thing doesn't really people I don't know, it doesn't really exist in music journalism that much.
Yeah.
There's like certain areas where
Yeah.
database like doesn't really people don't really go in this deep on certain
Well, that's
topics.
it. I mean, the only thing I can think of that's comparable as a topic would be, and I think it's due out on Fridays, the Spotify wrap up
Oh yeah.
thing that they do here, which is, personal listening habits. But yeah, it is a subject so rich and ripe for analysis that, I think it's wonderful that you've taken the effort to do this wonderful project. So thank you ever so much, Denise, for going through that backstory. Thank you to everyone out there for watching and listening, and see you soon on another episode of Explore Explain. Bye for now. To see more information about today's episode, including some links to key sites and resources mentioned, please visit my website at visualisingdata.com. Here you'll also be able to find details about my book, information about my public and private training courses,
as well as over a decade of blog posts. If you've enjoyed this series, please consider liking, subscribing, and spreading the word. See you next time.